You met Andy Griffith because of this building, is that right?
Yeah.
This building, 30 Rockefeller Plaza, famous broadcasting building in New York.
When the Andy Griffith Show hit the air on October 3rd, 1960, it quickly became a staple in homes and introduced audiences to Don Knotts. As Barney Fife, Don Knotts brought so much charm to his role, giving his character everything he had. But after 5 seasons, Don Knotts decided to move on from the show, and he wasn't the only one. Over time, several other cast members left too, and fans were left wondering why. Before his death in 2006, Don Knotts finally explained the real reason so many of the show's original cast walked away. So, what was really going on behind the scenes that pushed so many familiar faces out of Mayberry? Join us as we get into all the details. Life inside Mayberry. The Andy Griffith Show wasn't just another sitcom squeezed into a crowded TV lineup. It was the heartbeat of American living rooms from the moment it stepped onto CBS in 1960. Year after year, it held its ground in the Nielsen ratings, never dropping below 7th place. And by the time it wrapped in 1968, it had climbed all the way to number 1. That kind of loyalty doesn't come from gimmicks. It comes from a world viewers wanted to slip into every week. Mayberry, the fictional North Carolina town at the center of it all, felt like a place people already knew. Slow mornings, familiar faces, and a kind of easygoing simplicity that softened the edges of real life. At the center stood Sheriff Andy Taylor, played by Andy Griffith, the steady hand everyone trusted. His calm, practical ways kept the town running, even when its troublemakers weren't exactly criminal masterminds. Most of the time, Andy was saving people from their own well-meaning missteps, not from any real danger. The charm of Mayberry came from its characters, the kind who felt both exaggerated and strangely familiar. There was Gomer Pyle, the lovable gas station attendant who could turn a simple task into an odyssey. There was Otis, the town drunk who treated the jail like his personal Airbnb, checking himself in after every bender and strolling out once he was sober. And of course, there was Deputy Barney Fife, played by Don Knotts, whose enthusiastic but misguided approach to law enforcement caused more chaos than any outlaw ever did. Knotts poured everything into that role, and it paid off, earning him 4 Emmys and turning Barney into one of television's most unforgettable characters. The show was part of a bigger moment in 1960s television, a wave of lighthearted, rural-themed comedies that gave viewers a break from the noise of the real world. But Andy Griffith didn't just ride that wave, he shaped it. Its success spun off 2 new series, Gomer Pyle, USMC, and Mayberry, RFD, extending its universe and its charm long after the original ended. Many of the cast members carried that momentum into the next chapters of their careers. Don Knotts went on to headline a string of comedy films. Jim Nabors showcased his impressive singing voice and built a variety show around it. And a young Ron Howard, Opie, grew up to star in Happy Days before stepping behind the camera to direct films like Cocoon and A Beautiful Mind. For 8 seasons, Mayberry felt like home, familiar, warm, and impossible to forget. And at the heart of all that laughter was Don Knotts, the man whose career, charm, and unmistakable timing had become inseparable from Mayberry itself. The making of Don Knotts. Jesse Donald Knotts didn't just stumble into comedy, he grew into it. Born on July 21st, 1924, in Morgantown, West Virginia, he was the kid who couldn't sit still creatively. Before he even reached high school, he was already performing at church basements and school halls, carrying around a ventriloquist dummy and a handful of jokes he believed in more than anyone else did. He took that spark to New York City, hoping it would catch fire, but the city wasn't ready for him yet. So he went back home and enrolled at West Virginia University, regrouping without giving up. Then the war came. After his freshman year, Knotts joined the U.S. Army and traded small stages for the Pacific Islands, touring as part of a GI variety show called Stars and Gripes. Even in the middle of World War II, he found a way to make people laugh. That was who he was, a performer who knew how to lift the weight in the room, no matter where the room was. When the war ended and college was behind him, Knotts headed back to New York in 1948 with a clearer sense of what he wanted. This time, the city opened a door. He landed spots on radio and early television, working constantly, learning the rhythm of live performance, and sharpening that jittery, comedic timing that would eventually become his signature. Everything shifted in 1955 when he stepped onto a Broadway stage for No Time for Sergeants. That role didn't just introduce him to a wider audience, it introduced him to Andy Griffith. The chemistry was instant, even if neither of them knew how far it would take them. More roles came. The Steve Allen Show snapped him up, making him a regular from 1956 to 1960. When the show moved to Hollywood, Knotts followed, a leap that changed everything. He even reprised his sergeant's role in the 1958 film adaptation, once again alongside Griffith, who was becoming a familiar face both on-screen and off. Then came 1960, the moment that would define his legacy. Joining Andy Griffith on a brand new sitcom felt like a natural next step, but no one could have predicted what the world would do with Deputy Barney Fife. Knotts built that character from the ground up. The nervous energy, the overblown confidence, and the absolute chaos wrapped in a tiny uniform. Viewers adored him. Awards followed. 3 Emmys in 5 seasons, and the kind of fame that cements you into television history. But Knotts wasn't built for staying in one lane. In 1964, he stepped into his first leading film role in The Incredible Mr. Limpet, opening a run of quirky, small-budget movies that played perfectly to his offbeat charm. The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, The Reluctant Astronaut, and The Shakiest Gun in the West. Each one added another layer to his growing list of fan favorites. By the 1970s, though, the industry was shifting. The clean-cut comedy he excelled at suddenly felt out of sync with a more cynical Hollywood, pushing him toward family-friendly, often sillier roles. Disney's The Apple Dumpling Gang in 1975 kicked off a long-running partnership with Tim Conway, proving there was still plenty of room for his style, just in different corners of the spotlight. Television eventually pulled him back. In 1979, Knotts stepped into Three's Company as Mr. Furley. Loud suits, big personality, total scene stealer. He stayed until the show ended in 1984, reminding audiences that he could breathe life into any role, anytime. 2 years later, he reunited with the Mayberry family for Return to Mayberry, a TV movie that hit every nostalgic note fans had been craving. From 1988 to 1992, he joined Andy Griffith once more, this time on Matlock, playing an annoying neighbor who somehow added just the right amount of charm. Through all of this, Knotts carried private battles most people never saw: severe hypochondria, a degenerative eye disease, and an intense shyness that made his confidence on screen even more impressive. The late 1990s brought one more unexpected upswing. In 1998, he appeared in Pleasantville as the mysterious TV repairman who pulls 2 modern teens into a black and white world. It was subtle and clever and reminded Hollywood that Don Knotts wasn't a relic. He was timeless. The following year, he released his autobiography, Barney Fife, and Other Characters I Have Known, letting fans into the life behind all the laughs. It was a long journey from a West Virginia kid with a puppet to one of television's most beloved figures, and every step shaped the man who would eventually create one of the most memorable characters in TV history. Every awkward pause, every nervous tick, and every comic instinct he honed along the way led him to the role that would define his career: Barney Fife. Building Barney Fife. Barney Fife wasn't just written into the Andy Griffith Show. He was born out of Don Knotts' own instincts. When the Steve Allen Show wrapped and he found himself searching for his next move, Knotts caught an episode of The Danny Thomas Show featuring Andy Taylor. Something clicked. He picked up the phone, called Andy Griffith, and floated the idea that maybe this small-town sheriff could use a deputy. Griffith didn't hesitate. He pushed Knotts toward executive producer Sheldon Leonard, and from there, the pieces snapped into place. What made it all work was the shift that happened almost immediately. Griffith later remembered watching the show's second episode, Manhunt, and realizing the dynamic was all wrong with him as the main comic force. Don Knotts was the spark. If the show was going to work, Andy Taylor needed to be the calm center, and Barney Fife needed to be the storm around him. That decision reshaped the entire series and gave Knotts the space to build something unforgettable. From 1960 to 1965, Barney Fife became the heartbeat of Mayberry's chaos. Excitable, unpredictable, and determined to present himself as the ultimate lawman, he pulled viewers in with every misstep. His exit on the show was explained simply. He had taken a detective job in Raleigh, but the real story was far more tangled. Knotts had left because Griffith told the cast the show would end after season 5. Don, wanting to finally take a real swing at film roles, signed a contract with Universal. When Griffith later changed his mind and renewed the series, Knotts didn't back out of his new commitment. He walked away. even though it meant closing the door on the character that had made him a household name. Still, Barney never really left Mayberry. Knotts returned for guest spots every season until the show wrapped in 1968. He popped up again in the first episode of Mayberry RFD, watching Andy and Helen Crump get married. In 1971, he made a cameo on the new Andy Griffith Show, meeting a mayor who was practically Andy Taylor in everything but name. 15 years later, the reunion film Return to Mayberry brought Barney back home again. Older, still jittery, and now serving as the town's acting sheriff. Barney Fife worked because he was layered in a way sitcom characters rarely were at the time. On the surface, he strutted around with confidence he hadn't earned, acting like an expert on guns, martial arts, women, wilderness survival, psychology, and practically anything else that might get him attention. He desperately wanted to be seen as worldly, sharp, and the kind of man who had everything figured out. But underneath, he was insecure, easily rattled, and so naive that he could be tricked into buying a car that barely ran, as he did in Barney's first car. He longed to impress people, even when it blew up in his face. His singing voice was a perfect example. When he tried too hard, his pitch wandered all over the place. But when he relaxed, he could harmonize beautifully with Andy's guitar. His eagerness often made things worse, spilling secrets, mishandling information, and spiraling into panic at the slightest hint of danger. But every now and then, the clown stepped aside and the hero came out. In Jailbreak, he managed to rescue a state trooper and trap a group of criminals with a mix of courage and luck, one of the few times he caught the bad guys on purpose. In Andy on Trial, when a spiteful newspaper publisher tried to oust Andy as sheriff, Barney found his backbone. He delivered a heartfelt defense of Andy, laying out exactly why Mayberry needed him. It was one of his most honest moments, admitting that real law enforcement wasn't just about rules. It was about heart, humanity, and knowing when to trust people rather than paperwork. That balance, the bluster, the vulnerability, and the accidental triumphs are why Barney Fife became more than comic relief. Don Knotts didn't just play a character. He built a legend, one jittery gesture at a time. But while the Andy Griffith Show might have given us a timeless piece, things behind the scenes weren't so good. Behind the scenes drama. Frances Bavier may have played the warm, apron-clad heart of Mayberry, but behind the scenes, her experience was far from gentle. She once told Carolina Camera that after a decade of playing Aunt Bee, she felt swallowed by the character, that it became hard for people to see her as anything else. All the praise, all the recognition went to a version of herself created for television, and the real Frances slowly faded under the weight of that image. That frustration didn't stay quiet. Andy Griffith and Don Knotts felt the tension more than anyone. Bavier openly resented watching the two leads get the big laughs, the clever lines, and the moments audiences remembered. She told TV Guide, through reporting later shared by MeTV, that she often felt sidelined, taking a back seat while others enjoyed the spotlight. The imbalance bothered her enough that she sought therapy, hoping to untangle the knot of emotions tied to her place in the show. Off-screen, the gap between her and the rest of the cast grew wider. Griffith loved cracking jokes, pulling pranks, and keeping the mood light on set. Bavier couldn't stand any of it. She wanted focus, quiet, and professionalism, not the circus of laughter and teasing the others thrived on. According to Ron Howard's father, Rance Howard, Andy carried his own resentment toward Bavier, believing she wasn't his choice but a decision pushed onto him by producer Sheldon Leonard. It created an early tension that never quite softened. Things reached a point where even Jim Nabors had to intervene. Rance Howard remembered walking back from a table read when Nabors gently commented that Frances was a good actress and deserved better treatment. Andy didn't respond, but the moment revealed just how strained the dynamic had become. And when it came to Don Knotts, the situation was no better. Bavier explained to the Herald-Sun that through the entire run of the show, she barely exchanged more than a handful of words with him. Actors weren't the only ones who felt the divide. Howard Morris, Ernest T. Bass himself, directed 8 episodes of the series, and every time he worked with Bavier, he had to tread carefully. Something as simple as asking her to shift a few inches for a better shot could ignite her temper. Every moment with her required caution. Many viewers assumed she must have gotten along with Little Opie at least. But years later, in the mid-1980s, when Griffith and Ron Howard tried to visit her unannounced in her quiet Siler City home, she turned them away at the door. Reports from Triad City Beat noted that she had already refused to take part in the Mayberry reunion movie, and the reason was simple. she had never liked Andy Griffith. Not from the beginning. The hard feelings lingered for decades, but time has its own way of softening edges. Near the end of her life, when cancer had worn her down and the past felt closer than ever, she reached out to Andy with a final admission. She told him she was sorry they hadn't gotten along better, that the fault had been hers, and that she wished things had turned out differently. Andy responded gently, saying they had gotten along just fine, even if she didn't always feel it. It was a rare moment of honesty between two people who had spent years locked in a quiet, unspoken standoff. And for the first time, the divide between Aunt Bee and Mayberry's sheriff finally eased. Yet, behind the smiles, laughs, and small-town charm of Mayberry, not every cast member found their place, and some quietly struggled with their roles. Struggles that would eventually lead them to step away from the show altogether. The departures that shaped Mayberry. Eleanor Donahue stepped into Mayberry at just 23, bringing Ellie Walker to life, the bright-eyed druggist who briefly captured Andy Taylor's heart. Coming off the success of Father Knows Best, she expected a fresh start, but life behind the camera didn't unfold the way fans might imagine. She was a young divorcee raising a child, trying to steady herself emotionally while juggling a demanding new role. And as the months passed, she began to feel herself slipping into the background. Scripts that originally gave her witty lines slowly shifted those moments toward Don Knotts. His version of Barney Fife was lightning in a bottle, and the writers leaned into it. The decision elevated the comedy, but left Eleanor quietly questioning her place on the show, wondering if she added anything at all. The stress took its toll quickly. Weight loss came first, followed by pneumonia that sent her to the hospital and forced writers to scramble once again to cover her absence. Yet, in that difficult moment, one memory stayed with her for decades. Don Knotts picked up the phone. He checked on her, offered support, and made sure she knew she wasn't forgotten. In Tied Up in Knots, his daughter Karen shared that Eleanor remembered him saying he simply wanted to be sure she was all right, and she described him as absolutely precious. That one act of kindness meant more than he probably realized, and underscored just how isolating her experience on the show had been. She didn't receive another call from anyone else. By the time she recovered, her priorities had sharpened. She asked to be released from her 3-year contract, choosing her health and peace over the pressures of Mayberry. Producers didn't argue, and years later, Andy Griffith admitted that the show struggled to write meaningful roles for women, telling author Richard Kelly that the difficulty stemmed partly from his own complicated relationship with women in general. Eleanor's exit was brief, almost imperceptible on screen. Yet her story remains one of the clearest reminders that even Mayberry had its cracks. When Don Knotts eventually left after 5 seasons to pursue a movie career, those cracks widened. Barney Fife wasn't just the deputy, he was the comedic engine of the entire show. Without him, the chemistry shifted, and producers scrambled to fill the void. Their solution was Warren Ferguson, played by comedian Jack Burns. On paper, he sounded promising. Floyd's nephew from Boston, polished from the police academy, eager to step into Mayberry's quiet rhythm, but the scripts were written with Barney's voice, not Warren's, and audiences could feel the mismatch instantly. Warren's nervous, "huh?" catchphrase became more of an irritation than a charm. Even Andy struggled with the dynamic. He later recalled that within weeks, the entire team felt uncomfortable, and he admitted he wasn't easy to be around when the chemistry was off. Before Christmas, they made the call to let Burns go, paying out the rest of his contract. Burns later admitted he'd been bitter for a while, but he moved on to a strong career as a performer and writer. Warren, meanwhile, disappeared from Mayberry after just 11 episodes, quietly erased, never mentioned again. And when Andy visited Barney in Raleigh later on, the story acted as if Barney's old job had been sitting empty the whole time. Then there was Floyd Lawson, the barber who felt as essential to Mayberry as the courthouse and the front porch. Howard McNear played Floyd with a gentle, quirky charm that made the town feel real. But midway through season 3, McNear suffered a devastating stroke that left him paralyzed on one side. Everyone assumed his time on the show was over. A year and a half passed before the writers found themselves working on a tense episode involving Opie and Aunt Bee, a story begging for a warm dash of Floyd's humor. Producer Aaron Rubin sighed and admitted he wished Howard were still around. That thought sparked a phone call to the McNear home. His wife didn't hesitate. She explained that work would be a godsend. Howard had recovered enough to speak clearly and act with his signature timing, and desperately needed a purpose again. The team built special supports on set, wrote scenes that kept Floyd seated, and brought him back. Just like that, Mayberry felt whole again. He stayed with the show until the end, offering fans one more reminder that heart and strength were built into the fabric of Mayberry, not just the scripts. One by one, the exit shaped the town and nudged the show in new directions. Some departures were quiet, others painful, and a few unforgettable. But each one peeled back another layer of the world behind the camera. A reminder that for all its charm, Mayberry was held together by real people navigating real struggles. And sometimes, stepping away was the only way they could keep themselves standing. Don Knotts admits why the casts left the Andy Griffith Show. Before his death in 2006, Don Knotts confirmed the real reasons the cast left the Andy Griffith Show, and the truth was a lot messier than anyone realized. On the surface, it always sounded simple. Barney Fife went off to Hollywood. Don Knotts wanted movies, bigger roles, and a shot at something beyond a tiny sheriff's office in Mayberry. And yes, that part was true. The film career came, the success came, and his oddball charm translated beautifully to the big screen. But ambition was only half the story. The other half lived in the shadows, tucked behind contracts, money, and the kind of misunderstandings that quietly shape a career. If you peel back the layers, you start to see the real picture. Don wasn't just leaving Mayberry because he'd outgrown it. He was leaving because despite being one of the most beloved faces on the show, he wasn't making much from it at all. The paychecks looked decent from the outside, but compared to what the show was bringing in, especially for Andy, Don's share was shockingly small. Andy Griffith had been set up from day one. His manager, Dick Linke, fought tooth and nail to secure him majority ownership of the entire series. It wasn't just a starring role for Andy, it was a financial empire. If the show soared, Andy soared with it creatively, professionally, and financially. And it did. Mayberry wasn't just good for Andy, it was golden. Don Knotts, on the other hand, had none of that protection. No ownership, no stake, just a flat weekly salary like everyone else. And as Sherwin Bash, Don's manager, later put it, the deal was brutally lopsided. Bash admitted in the Andy Griffith Show book that he'd worked out a terrible deal, one that left Don making no real money after 5 years of carrying half the comedy on his back. For all the laughs Barney Fife delivered, Don was only earning about $1,250 an episode, around $35,000 a year. Respectable, sure, but nothing compared to the treasure chest the show generated for its lead star, and Don felt that discrepancy deeply. According to Daniel DeVries, who chronicled all of this in Andy and Don, there was a private meeting after the 5th season where Don finally tried to fix the situation. He asked for a bigger piece of the show, but the request didn't land the way he'd hoped. Andy misunderstood what Don was asking for, and the moment slipped away before either of them could patch the miscommunication. No new deal, no ownership, no raise big enough to change anything. So Don did the only thing that made sense. He took the leap to Hollywood, where the money matched the work, and where his comedic persona could finally stretch beyond the borders of Mayberry. Once he left, he never returned as a regular. Only guest appearances, only visits, never again part of the machine. But despite everything, Don never let bitterness stain his history with the show. Whenever he spoke about his exit, he framed it simply. He'd made the right choice by chasing film work, and the deeper truths, the money issues, the mismatched expectations, the misunderstanding that ultimately pushed him out only became clearer years later as the people involved grew older and a little more honest. He also never turned on the other cast members who left. His comments were always centered on his own path, not anyone else's decisions. And through it all, he kept his friendship with Andy Griffith intact long after they'd both moved on. They worked together again. They stayed close. And whatever messy business had happened behind the scenes never swallowed the bond between them. So, when Don Knotts opened up before his death about the real reasons people left the Andy Griffith Show, the story wasn't some dramatic Mayberry betrayal. It was something quieter and more human, a mix of ambition, exhaustion, mismatched paychecks, and the complicated truth that everyone outgrows even the sweetest chapters eventually. And in Don's case, that chapter closed not because he wanted to leave Mayberry behind, but because Mayberry never fully gave him the share he'd earned. Behind the smile, Don Knotts' life and legacy. Off-screen, Don Knotts was a very different man from the bumbling, anxious deputy viewers loved in Mayberry. Friends remembered him as charming and effortlessly magnetic, a bit of a ladies' man who carried himself like a young Frank Sinatra. He dated widely and enjoyed life in ways that seemed at odds with Barney Fife's nervous energy. Yet, Those who knew him well saw a quiet, thoughtful side that few on screen ever glimpsed. Knotz's personal life was filled with the same highs and lows that defined any human story. He married 3 times. His first marriage, to Catherine Metz in 1947, lasted until 1964, producing a son, Thomas, and a daughter, Karen Knotts, who would follow her father into show business. After their divorce, Don took on the challenge of raising Karen as a single parent, balancing a rising career in Hollywood with fatherhood, a responsibility he approached with quiet dedication. In 1974, he married Loralee Chuchna, a union that ended in divorce in 1983. His final marriage, to Frances Yarborough in 2002, lasted until his death in 2006, offering him companionship in his later years. Beyond the romances and family, Knotts contended with private struggles. He was known to battle hypochondria and later macular degeneration, challenges that he faced with the same understated humor that defined his life. Co-star Betty Lynn described him as gentle and reserved, very quiet and very sweet, nothing like Barney Fife. And TV writer Marc Evanier captured the sentiment of many when he called Knotts the most beloved person in all of show business. A fascinating posthumous revelation came from Ron Howard in February 2025. He and Knotts were distant cousins, a fact neither knew during Knotts' lifetime. It was a quiet twist that felt almost too whimsical for the real world, adding a final layer to the actor's already remarkable story. Don Knotts passed away at the age of 81 on February 24, 2006, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. Pneumonia, compounded by lung cancer, claimed him after months of treatment, though he had returned home feeling temporarily better. He was laid to rest at Westwood Memorial Park in Los Angeles, leaving behind a legacy that stretched far beyond Mayberry. Even after his death, Knotts' influence endured. In 2011, his simple granite headstone was replaced with a bronze plaque depicting some of his most iconic roles, a tangible acknowledgement of his enduring impact. In 2016, a statue sculpted by Jamie Lester was unveiled outside the Metropolitan Theater in his hometown of Morgantown, West Virginia, immortalizing a man who had brought laughter into millions of homes while quietly living a life of resilience, charm, and kindness. Don Knotts' story reminds us that behind every beloved character is a real person with struggles, triumphs, and moments of quiet humanity. And in his case, the heart behind the humor made all the difference. Were you a fan of The Andy Griffith Show? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.